Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host Talking with Famous People, and today we're going to be discussing pathologies, or actually disorders, personality disorders, and cognitive functions, and personality type. So I prepared a document here to go over, and I will put it on half the screen. And the people in the room already have a copy of this. So these are the listed disorders on this site that Chloe linked to earlier in the closed group. And again, if you're somebody who's on Facebook and would like to join our closed group, it's a fun group. These are the disorders that were listed on this site: paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. So it is um, it is the reason these are the disorders listed is basically because they represent certain aspects of normal range functionality that, if imbalanced too much, renders the person as a whole um, significantly non-optimal in their functioning. So paranoid then is going to be, they have three categories for these disorders: eccentric, dramatic, and anxious. Paranoid is eccentric, and it's basically an outlier in trust, is my interpretation of it, which is to say that if you look at a normal spectrum of human beings, they land somewhere between extremely gullible and paranoid. And if you're very close to the paranoid end of that spectrum, then you're an outlier in trust, not in the positive sense of having more trust, but in the sense that you're an outlier on that spectrum. You have very little trust. And schizoid is basically about attachment. So you have limited, uh, below normal range attachment emotionally to other people. And the third eccentric one is schizotypal. That is about agreeability, basically. It's saying, I don't want to go along with the flow. I'm going to be very excessive in my individualism, such that I'll be the guy who wears a crazy hat all the time and has a sparkly suit on and whatever else. Okay. So then, in terms of the four dramatic ones, they're called dramatic because they compel reaction from others. Basically, antisocial meaning they're an outlier in transgression, which means they transgress against other people more than the acceptable norm. Borderline is about relational stability. They're much less relationally stable. In other words, they don't assume their relationship is has object permanence, basically. Um, and there's a need for a metaphysical object permanence related to relationships in order for people to feel comfortable allowing the relationship to exist across time without actively engaging it in the moment. So, histrionics is the third dramatic, and that's simply a display outlier. It's saying this person is displaying way too much. Whatever the legitimacy of their thing, it's exaggerated in its display. The display doesn't correlate with the appropriate or normally considered appropriate response to a given stimulus. If the three anxious categories are the three anxious disorders are avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. Avoidant being anxious about social efficacy specifically. So if you feel so anxious about your ability to successfully interact socially that you avoid social interaction to an extreme degree, then you're anxious, obviously, and you're an outlier in at least self concept of social efficacy. If you're dependent, that means you rely too much on other people for your validation, your okayness, your self esteem, your care, or whatever. And that's fundamentally an outlier in accountability. So you don't want to take on the burden of autonomy and see yourself as an equal person to others. That's an issue in accountability. And obsessive compulsiveness is an outlier in acceptance. In other words, they're unreasonably unaccepting of things. That it's a control issue. It's like I don't like the fact that I don't have control over things very precisely, so I excessively control these other things that I can because I can't. I have trouble accepting my limited capacity as an agent to dictate the terms of things. All right, so let's go over to column number 4 here. My assertion is that issues of having poor trust means you have bad TE. Because if trust requires you to accept that if you do the right steps, things will proceed as expected because of the logics of the world, particularist and subjective though they may be, they nevertheless are reliable within a given node, and thus we should be able to trust that, like, if somebody says blah, that and there's no indication that they're lying exactly, then they're going to do blah. That if somebody says, I'm going to do blah, that if we can conceive ourselves of how it is they're going to attain that, then um, we are more likely to trust them. So basically, if you have TE in the 7th or 8th slot, that's what I mean by bad there, and either SI or NI in the other one, then you're susceptible to paranoia as a disorder. That means that INFJ, ISFJ, ESFJ, ENFJ are susceptible to paranoia because they have both bad TI and bad SI or NI. For schizoid, I'm going to go a little faster now that I've given you the gist of how this thing works. For schizoid, it's saying that if you have bad FI, then you have poor attachment capacity, basically. That's 7th or 8th slot FI. And you're going to necessarily then have bad SE or NE. So one of your actions functions is bad, your subjective valuing function is bad, and therefore you're going to have a difficult time understanding how connectivity between individual humans happens. And that's ENTP, ESTP, INTP, ISTP. Third one, schizotypal. That's the too iconoclastic, too different all the time, always contrasting against others. You would think ENTP would make this list, but it didn't, based on my notion that this 7 and 8 thing is what we can correlate with these. Whether that proves to be accurate or not, I don't know, but it's just I'm just musing, so to speak. It says ENFP, ESFP, INFP, ISFP are the likely types to be too eccentric, too iconoclastic. I mean, it makes sense that they would be, since ENTPs actually have third slot FE. They may do that on their way to outgrowing that, I guess, but I don't think they're going to persist in that state very long. So I think they're less likely to be so imbalanced in that area that they'd be called schizotypal. Okay, so that's the eccentric ones. Any comments on the eccentricity uh, category of disorders?
Is this really accurate? Like, schizoid is not only interpersonal, it also has to do with getting joy from activities.
Well, I mean, that would be uh, an issue of attachment as well. If you're not subjectively valuing, in other words, developing or experiencing attachment to a given thing, then you aren't going to feel a lot of joy from it. In other words, no pain, no gain,
So you
right?
don't get joy, like you don't get joy from people, and you don't get joy from doing things. So you're pretty much just flat.
Well, I mean, okay, I don't see why that's not an issue of attachment. Attachment, like it, that's where that's where emotion comes from, is the risk of loss, the actual loss of things that are valued for subjective reasons. That's going to cause a lot of emotion, or the attainment of things that are valued for subjective reasons. That's going to cause a lot of emotions. The attainment of things like conclusions about something that we disagree about, but we argue it out, and okay, you're right, I'm right about this. We're not going to be particularly attached to those things. Those things might make us feel a
Oh,
little bit, but
and if you're schizoid, you don't care about praise. Like, oh, FE, I don't care about that. That doesn't fit the INTP for shit.
Um, I mean, I would say that being schizoid means that you find everything hollow. It doesn't mean that your motivational architecture is different. It just means it's not working properly. Obviously, this is not saying ENTPs, INTPs are likely to be more schizoid than others. It's saying ENTPs and INTPs are more likely to be schizoid than others.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction to make. I am not saying that these types are likely to be more disordery in this fashion than the other types. I am instead saying that these types are more likely to be this disorder than other types. But if you're not that disorder, I'm not making a claim that you're more like that disorder than some other type. No, if you don't display this weird disorder quality of imbalance, being that much of an outlier on this one particular vector, then you're not. There's nothing to be. There's nothing wrong with you, right? There's not even anything wrong really with people with these disorders. What I'm saying is that to the extent that somebody's such an outlier in terms of poor functioning on one of these vectors that they get a disorder named to them, then it's likely to be one of these types that displays the disorder in this capacity.
And but also, like, the traits of that some people might perceive those types as displaying as that, even if that's not the case.
That's true. I'm not saying I'm not drawing an important distinction here that ought to be probably drawn, which is self-identifying as this disorder versus being identified with by others as this disorder. I'm treating it as something that we can determine without the observer, and that's a reification fallacy. So you're right to point that out, Susie. I guess what I mean here is if you were to reach consensus between the professional diagnoser and the person being diagnosed, and they both agreed that they did have um, a non-optimal imbalance in the area indicated, trust, attachment, agreeability, whatever, that the type that would be most likely to reach consensus with a professional diagnoser on this disorder would be those four types.
But what is the correlation there, which makes that likely?
Well, my claim is that the reason those four types are more likely to be paranoid is because paranoia being because it's an expression of being an outlier on a spectrum of trust, it's an expression of bad TE because bad TE explains how things work. In other words, if you understand that this step and that step lead to blah 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 really clearly,
Yeah,
then it requires less trust, and so you're less likely to be damaged that badly in the trust area.
that's fair enough, but schizoid and eccentric and attachment.
Well, I mean,
I don't know about that one.
attachment's all about FI. So if
But if you don't necessarily need to be attached to stuff to get pleasure from it.
well, you're attached to the experience, then I mean that's the thing. If you're a hedonist, nobody calls a hedonist schizoid.
Yeah.
A schizoid is hollow. What that means is they're having problems identifying what they actually think and value and feel about things. And so, for example, an ENTP might be just as likely to experience hollow, emotionless kind of fear that one just doesn't get human beings as an INTP, but is much more likely to display otherwise. Regardless, when it's a disorder, it is manifest as a behavior that is, I guess you could look at it and say, well, that individual is not behaving in ways that are reflective of legitimate or real human connection or something. I don't know.
Or
This is
or you
not.
can say that they they experience the world in such a way which has been
I mean, we can certainly come up with a whole set of explanations for these disorders that are not based in cognitive functions at all. And I'm not invalidating those. I'm saying this framework, and this is the insight I had about it today. If it doesn't pan out, it doesn't pan out, you know?
Yeah, I was just listening from here.
I mean, I'm happy to have you chime in, but try not to critique on what it doesn't do. You know, if you think my explanation of the link to FI to those things is bad, if you think FI doesn't link to attachment, that's great critique. But if you're just saying, well, it also doesn't solve cancer, Eric, then that's not useful. All right, Schizotypal Ti, bad. If you are so interested in being iconoclastic, being different, it means you're not interested in actually adjudicating things objectively. You're interested in how positions link to the self and express what has to be at this point, what has to be for these types, a unconscious or countervalued extroverted feeling. So they don't have conscious extroverted feeling, and so they think that extroverted feeling is actually a external display of introverted feeling, which it's not at all. And so then they think, I'm going to express myself with my crazy outfits, and I'm going to express myself by being different than everybody else. And that's why you end up with TI polar or TI eighth, and bad SE or any means you're more likely to be diagnosed and agree with the diagnosis, I guess, is what I said earlier. Schizotypal. That means ENFP, ESFP, INFP, ISFP. I would perfectly accept any critique that says ISFPs are not likely to be that exactly, but I added them because that's what this equals when you do the math on it or whatever. Okay, so next, antisocial transgression. That's polar NE because you can't think of the possibilities enough to understand the fundamental agential scope and significance of the other. And it correlates with bad FI or TI. Either you're bad at being fair or you're bad at subjectively valuing, and so that's why you're okay with punching that guy in the face. ESTP, ESFP, ISTP, ISFP. I think that one makes perfectly good sense. If you're going to have people punch people in the face, it's going to be those four types. Hi, Joel.
Are you trying to go through the entire DSM-5?
Not the entire, it's this many. I've listed them at the beginning. We're on antisocial. We've got borderline, histrionic, narcissistic, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive to go. Borderline personality disorder, I've seen it in action. Go ahead, Kato, or whoever said that.
There you go, dude.
Great.
That was me. Go ahead.
Alright, so borderline, that's polar TI. The only way that you can, maybe, it could be TE, maybe, but I don't think so, because it's like borderline personality is being insanely antagonistically illogical to your partner. I hate you, don't leave me, I hate you, don't leave me. If that's not polar TI, I don't know what the fuck is. So, that means you're going to be INFP, ISFP, ESFP, ENFP. Now, this next one, I couldn't find a way to make 7 and 8 work. So, I changed it. And I said, well, on this one, it's either TI fourth or TI polar. So, not 7th or 8th, but 7th or 4th. And that way I got histrionic turned out to be ESFP, ESFJ, ENFJ, ENFP, which seemed like the types would be histrionic, you know. Narcissistic, that's a dramatic one. The last dramatic one is egocentrism, and outlier egocentrism means you're going to have polar 8-slot SI, and that you're also going to have bad TE or FE, a bad interface function plus a polar knowledge, subjective knowledge renders the INFJ, INTJ, ENFJ, and ENTJ the most likely to be narcissistic. Again, that seems to line up right on the fucking money. Again, most of these, I thought about the function first, I plugged that in, did the math, so to speak, and came up with those things. So the math is, if SI is 7 or 8, then which types would be narcissistic? If, like that, you know? Alright, avoidant social efficacy, FE is polar or 8. That means SI or NI is the other polar or 8. And that means your avoidant types are going to be INTJ, ISTJ, ESTJ, and ENTJ. That also seems to make good sense. Um, Dependent types is going to be again polar Ti, polar 8 Ti because it's a failure to be fair, and therefore also the other one that's bad is going to be the action function. That's going to be ENFP, ESFP, INFP, and ISFP. And then obsessive compulsive, that also seems to line up perfectly. Although maybe all introverts are dependent. I don't know. Obsessive compulsive is FE polar 8th, and that means SI or NI in the other one. And that means your obsessive compulsives are INTJ, ISTJ, ESTJ, ENTJ. So that's what I did there. That's what it came out to be. What do you guys think?
Are you on narcissism still? Because I got fucked up during that one.
No, I finished the whole thing.
Okay.
But
Narcissism one?
there's a link here. Here, I'll put the link here as well. Again, Kyle, if you want to look at the document.
Okay. Yeah, I will. I honestly was thinking this myself because I've been like fucking being weird, and it's really weird that I've been like the past week I've been thinking about the DSM kind of, or not the whole fucking thing, but a lot of it is correlated.
Ken?
Eric, are you saying that these are like direct type correlations?
I'm saying if somebody's going to be diagnosed, and most people would agree with that diagnosis, that somebody is, let's say, dependent personality disorder, that that person will be most likely one of those types. I'm not saying that if you are one of those types, you're likely to be more dependent. I'm just saying that if you have a problem of dependency that makes you an outlier on that scale of accountability in a negative fashion, then you're likely to be one of those types.
What about like mistypes for people?
Mistypes?
So I was thinking about it like if there is a correlation with types, having certain disorders or stuff like that. What if people that maybe not even had the disorders, but if they expressed behaviors that were similar to that, I was wondering if that could like lead to mistypes in people where they're like, oh, well, they act like this, so they're probably this type, or they look like this, like you're.
Well, I definitely think there's a risk with this document to get people to think, well, therefore, if I see somebody being dependent, that means they're a blah, one of those 4 types. No, it shouldn't be used like that, and that's what I'm trying to stress over and over again here is, do not think that I'm saying those 4 types are more likely to be paranoid or blah 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 in the sense that they are, or that they're likely to. I'm sorry, I'm not saying they're likely to be more paranoid, just because their type is more likely to be paranoid. So don't think that if you see somebody displaying non-pathological stuff that we call paranoid, that doesn't mean that they're any more likely to be those 4 types, because they're not actually paranoid. We're just using that word to describe paranoid reminiscent behaviors or something.
I have something interesting to caveat off of that with the mistyping. I read something about SI, and this is my understanding of SI and upbringing. So if you have you're feeling SI down, you're raised in a particular manner. That's let's say you're an ISFJ or ISTJ, a really a gamma quadra household that can. I'm trying to frame this right, but possibly that you can get some of the ENTJ narcissism. You know what I mean? Or that could misconstrue with mistyping. So like,
it is
there
true.
was an article about ISFJ and Kanye West. I don't fucking know. I didn't care enough to really make an opinion on whether he is or not. But they associated him with narcissism, but at the same time saying it's ISFJ. And the good point was SI.
Okay.
His mother instilled it in him.
Here's the problem with that. First of all, Kanye's INFJ. He's not ISFJ. And second of all, yes, ISFJs can be very selfish and can be spoiled and stuff, but that's not narcissistic. That's them setting boundaries.
Well, no, it's not to the ISFJ in general. I'm just saying certain the intertype relations in general. How if you're raised in a certain household that's countervalued to your upbringing, and you're not able to see nothing that you value is valued and is countervalued, how it can lead to some of those weird ass fucking disorders or diagnoses, and then you might go, oh, I'm not a fucking, or you might say, okay, I'm really fucking dependent or whatever, and then, or you get diagnosed as whatever, and then you might see MBTI or socionics, like, oh, I'm this type because this type's really associated with a, you know, dependency because of inferior SI or whatever, when really you could be something different like an INTJ. You know what I'm trying to say? Makes sense in my head, probably not yours.
Um. Can you give me a little bit of a repeat on the last bit of
Okay,
it?
okay, let's say an INFP, right? And somehow INFP gets raised by dual fucking ENTP, fucking ISFJ parents, right? They're valuing FE, they're valuing FE and TI. Now you're judging the kid based off those assumptions, and you're like, okay, and especially the ENTP doesn't get fucking FI at all. So he's like, why are you so fucking weird? Why is my kid so weird? Couldn't that just the scope and the effect of being raised in someone who countervalues your leading function, fuck the kid up or fuck whoever up psychologically, and then they get diagnosed with whatever disorder.
I
I
mean,
mean,
okay, yeah, I would agree with you that if you've got an ENTP ISFJ duality couple and they're raising an INFP, that there are going to be value conflicts. I think the critique that the INFP is going to hear most frequently is you're being too sensitive. But I don't think, however, that the INFP is necessarily going to have a lot of problems with their parents. I think that the thing about Alpha Quadra is we are first and foremost married. So unless the Alpha Quadra couple is um, abusive in some fashion, they're gonna want to see their kid happy, and they're gonna try not to hold too many grudges about how she decides things differently. If they're aware of cognitive functions at all, then they'll understand. Oh, she's FITE, and that's why she's wrong.
that's a good counter argument. I'm just saying in general, like with disregard to any, you know,
I mean, I like to separate out the pathologies from subpathological behavior. So it's like I think anyone's subject to being substantially defined by how they're treated as a kid, uh, especially if there's abuse, and and naturally anybody who's abusive is going to damage a kid. I think an INFP can be raised perfectly well by lots of different kinds of parents as long as they do basic parent things that almost all parents do, like protect their kid, respect their kid's individuality, and love their kid as unconditionally as possible. What INFP really needs is unconditional love. And unconditional love does not always come without critique. It comes sometimes with critique, but it's not looking for things to critique. So an advantage that INFP has with ENTP and ISFJ example parents is ISFJ and ENTPs, we're not looking to critique in the family. We're looking to critique externally maybe, but not in the family.
okay. No, I agree. No, I mean that's kind of a not trying. Maybe we're biased because we're of Alpha Quadrant ourselves, and we think that we're all accepting. But let's say, uh, I'm just saying, no, you're right with the abusiveness in general. But let's say it's Beta Quadrant, right? Completely countervalued to the INFP in general, and she's getting raised by ESTP, and I don't know how to fuck, but let's say an ESTP and ISTP fucking parents.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Let me
That
sidetrack for a second. Let me just
ESTP
mention
is
something
fucking
here.
fucked.
Light
Huh?
bulb, you're totally right. That's a great distinction to make. INFP wants authentic love, and ENFJ wants unconditional love. ISFJ wants unconditional love too, or at least Kimberly does. I think ISFJs really do. They don't like criticism. They want to be loved. They want to be adored and protected. It's slightly different than unconditional love, I guess.
Well, I put INFP and ENFJ on these levels because one has starts with FE and one starts with FI. So your talk Kim is SI. So
Right.
not
Okay. Yeah, you're right.
quite.
Protected and adored means loved in a comforting, subjectively knowable way, and be made safe in your six enneagram castle. So that makes perfectly good sense. Uh, okay, that's a good distinction, though. It is true that the FI Dom wants authentic love, not unconditional love, and they will they will not eat your bullshit unless it's extremely convincing. So, okay, what else were we talking? What were we talking about? Oh, anything else about anything? Ken, did you have something to say?
Not currently.
Okay, nice to see you. By the way, I there's a stack of memos and other paperwork on your desk about loose meats related catastrophes. You are the czar of loose meats, but have been well. I haven't gotten any reports from you about loose meats, and I haven't heard. People have been telling me that their loose meats related problems are gone unattended to, Ken. So just letting you know.
So, so I think that there's been some confusion because my formal office was actually replaced. That there's actually a meat packing plant that's in effect now. So there's no more necessary need for somebody who handles loose meats because now it's being processed by damn machines. I mean, it's the way of the future.
What? Listen, you know what you've been doing? You've been buying a load of bull from the machine manufacturers. Those machines loosen almost as much meat as your average human. Okay, so don't don't think that just because it's a corporate machine that it's gonna create unloose meat, tight meat as we call it, or cubed meat. I'm going to play one little quick thing here in this room at the conclusion of this video because I think it's very, very important and it's definitely related to this thing here that we're talking about. Namely, I'm going to explore how one of the personality disorders that is not given enough attention, we need to raise awareness, is loose meatsomania. Loose meatsomaniacs, they loosen their meats constantly and they act as though it's no big deal. It's time for us to hold them to account. And I want to play this there. I'm done. Here we go. Last thing in this video. The best song ever. The Czar of Loose Meats. The song I wrote for Ken. Loose meats is an epidemic in the country. What it can attain a solution. And I see in additional delight. He was too busy for purpose. I can buy a record, million times as a TV now. Didn't good, made no sense. Why would we give people back on fans when giving that? Got a problem of losing, I say. It's definitely cause thy loose meats. We got a czar of loose meats. Easy to beat the deal with meat. I think you'll be great at this feat. It's a county seat of department. I'm wondering whether you should go in there because you're wishing that there weren't so many people staring at the meat that's singing from your ceiling and the floor. I think you got more loose meats in store. all that we've been looking for. Yeah, the more focus all blues meets.
Beautiful.
Yeah. That was one of the most important moments in music's history. And you guys were able to share it with me today. Thanks. And thank you at home for watching this exciting episode of Talking with Famous People, in which we explored an adventure called learning about how you need to not forget to eat plenty of cheese.